Some people say it's hard to believe that the moon landings were faked. I say it's hard to believe that they were real. What NASA is claiming is that they went 1,000 times farther than they can go today with 50-year-older technology on the very first attempt with 1/1,000,000th the computing power in all of NASA than is in a cell phone. All the proof that you need that the moon landings are fake is in this one picture. In sunlight, shadows will always run parallel with one another. This is because the sun is about 1,000,000 times bigger than the earth, and it casts shadows in the same direction over an entire continent. So you'll see in sunlight, shadows always run parallel and never intersect. Here's a picture which the federal government claims was taken on the moon. The astronaut shadow runs at 12 o'clock, and this rock, only about 5 feet away, the shadow runs at 9 o'clock. This is a 90-degree difference from objects 5 feet apart from one another. This proves that this was taken on Earth with an electrical light inside of a television studio. This is all the proof that you need that the moon landings were fake. If Toyota said that they made a car 50 years ago that could go 50,000 miles on a gallon of gasoline, and yet today their best car could only go 50 miles per gallon, or 1,000th the distance, wouldn't the fraud of the previous claim be obvious? And yet this is exactly the moon landing fraud, and yet people don't see it because of their emotional attachment to it. They're claiming they went 1,000 times farther 50 years ago than they can go today with 50-year-older technology. That doesn't make any sense. It's the only time in history that a technological achievement like the automobile or the airplane or nuclear power, that no nation on earth could repeat it 50 years later, when in fact it should be 100 times greater 50 years later. If they could go to the moon with 1960s technology, men would be in another solar system by now. Men would have walked on Mars 10 years later, 40 years ago, which never happened. And there would be bases on the moon there today, of which there are none. It's the only time in the history of the world that technology that cost $175 billion was deliberately destroyed afterwards. Would Bill Gates spend $175 billion to make the first computer, and then when he was done, throw it and the schematics in the trash? But that's what NASA claims that they did. They only did that to destroy the evidence of the fraud, which is proof itself that they didn't go, because if they really went, they would never destroy the technology. The B-52 bomber was made 70 years ago and is still in service today in the United States Air Force because it worked so well. Now they want to return to the moon, and they're having to recreate all that equipment from scratch because they deliberately destroyed it in order to hide the evidence of the fraud. I say it's harder to believe that the moon landings are real than to believe that they were fake. And this one picture proves that it was taken inside of a television studio on Earth.
All right, really fascinating there, Bart. Thank you for that 3-minute intro. But one of the most compelling pieces of evidence that you gave to me and that I learned from our previous interviews was about the rovers on the moon. Not only is it a total clown show joke that they could even function with all that moon dust and everything, but, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that they kept sort of replacing, like the parts kept changing on them in other missions. Am I remembering that correctly? What's the story?
Well, there's a lot of hearsay about what's going on and confusion. I think that's kind of deliberate from NASA. The main thing about the moon rover that I bring up is, okay, so your only life support is your backpack with a limited supply of oxygen and then the lunar module. Would you really drive miles away and then if the car broke down, have to walk back and run out of oxygen before you got there?
Probably not.
I don't think they would do such a thing. In today's dollars, those things cost $100 million, and they had about 1/10 the parts of a Jeep. So I'm not sure why they cost $100 million each. We'll have to ask NASA about that one. The whole thing was a cash cow. It's basically a front. I used to go to this fried chicken place in Nashville that never had anybody in there. but there's a woman sitting there taking call after call on a 20-line telephone. I think it was a numbers racket. And so this is a front, just like the CIA has front businesses for their, operations. This is just a front. It's a cash cow. The different thing about the moon landing fraud, for example, whoever shot JFK, he's still dead. It's just a matter of who did it and why, or 9/11. Those people are still dead. It's just a matter of who did it and why. This is different. This is a positive lie. You see, it's really the only positive conspiracy you could say. And people wanted to believe it. It has become a god to people. And people are offended. I talked to a professor of an aerospace university. I showed him all this proof. He said, Bart, there's nothing you could ever say that would make me recant the glorious moon landings. And I said, well, what about this? What if you saw an astronaut go on national television and tearfully confess that the moon missions were faked and please forgive him? And the professor said that he would still think he walked on the moon anyway.
Wow. Well, let's talk about the
and
reasons.
Teaching university.
Yeah, absolutely. But you're right. This mythos of the Apollo moon landings has become interwoven into the fabric of America's consciousness. But there are very specific strategic reasons for this that have a lot to do with the former Soviet Union, for example. For example, the projection of American dominance in space, trying to intimidate Russia. And I can't help but point out the parallels with today's propaganda with the Ukraine war. Here we have America's propaganda machine constantly claiming Russia is losing, constantly claiming Russia's troops are demoralized. And we're just on the verge of kicking Russia's butt if we just had $60 billion more in this case. And none of it's true. None of it's true. Russia's outproducing. Russia has more industrial output. Russia has better hypersonic missiles. I mean, the U.S. doesn't even have functioning hypersonic missiles at all. That's an embarrassment. If you went to the moon and then how many decades later you still can't make a hypersonic missile that works in combat? Come on. Russia's got hypersonic missiles. Russia is just so far ahead of the U.S. in terms of its technology and its electromagnetic warfare capabilities. But the U.S. always relies on propaganda and just disinformation. So looking back in history, you have to question the moon landings and say, was that part of a disinformation campaign? And it seems like you're saying that you believe that's part of it.
Yeah, definitely. There are multiple reasons, or you could say multiple benefits for faking the moon landing. One thing to consider is really they just didn't have to do it. Kennedy set a goal that couldn't be achieved. And you do realize NASA has never kept a schedule, not a single time in their entire history, except the most complicated mission of all time that had never been tried before. That one, they were ahead of schedule. So they could have just said, well, we can't do it. We're going to need more time, or maybe we'll need cooperation with Russia in order to combine our talents. But they did it anyway. And you may remember when Clinton, president, was finally admitted that he had an affair. And they said, well, why did you do it? He said, because I could, meaning because I could get away with it. And this is the sheer arrogance of this. And so for people who are really interested in bringing down the corrupt federal government, the moon landing fraud is the key. It's the linchpin. Because I get emails all the time or reviews of my book that say, if the truth comes out about the moon landing fraud, the American public will never trust them again. And so when I first found it, of course, this footage I'm about to describe, you can see it for free on the homepage of Sibrel.com. I uncovered classified footage of them faking being halfway to the moon right in front of your eyes.
Oh, I saw that. That was mind-blowing. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. It blew my mind. I grew up as the biggest fan of the space program. And when I heard it might be fake, I had an open mind, but I thought they probably went. And then the more I looked into it, the stranger it became. And even though there was all this evidence, I still said, well, I need something a little more concrete. And I have a guy who's a multimillionaire who builds rockets for NASA, who knows it was fake, gave me $1 million to produce my film, which is for free on the homepage of Sibrel.com, that has this footage in it. So this film took 7 years to make, 4,000 hours of editing just to edit a 45-minute film.
and I'm almost done. I pop in a tape. It says, don't show to the public. I'm like, oh, this should be good. I hit fast forward because as an editor, I can see things faster. And I see the same shot over and over and over again for like 10, 20, 30 minutes. I'm like, oh, this is unedited footage, which they never gave me any. And it's the crew faking being halfway to the moon with a 1-foot model of the Earth, dated 2 days into the flight. And Buzz Aldrin, Neil Armstrong, and Michael Collins are on camera doing it. And there's a third track of audio of the CIA prompting them to fake a 4-second radio delay to not give away they're still in Earth orbit.
And
when I saw
that's the
that
video
tape,
where at the end, like the lights come on inside the capsule and it shows that it was just a set.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I have the unedited version. The segment that they used this exact segment in all of their reels that claim this is halfway to the moon.
It's so fake. The Earth through the window is not even real either. It's so fake.
Exactly. And even my greatest critic says that is them faking being halfway to the moon. They have to admit it. Oh, so here's the point, Mike. I show this, freaking out to the news director at NBC. The guy turns pale white, falls back in his chair, puts his hand over his mouth and says, oh my gosh, they really didn't go to the moon. This proves it beyond any doubt. Then I say, what are we going to do about it? And he thanks and thanks and he thanks. And then he says, I will not air this. It will cause a civil war. I will not be responsible for being the man who caused the second American Civil War. Do you see this? But I didn't agree with that assessment at the time. I've started to change my mind only a few weeks ago because I got that review of my book and they said this, if it comes out, the American public will never trust them again. It will outrage them. It was an unnecessary lie. And as you know, in my book, they murdered people to cover it up. And it's not my opinion. That's the opinion of Betty Grissom and Scott Grissom, the wife and son of an Apollo astronaut who was going to be the first man to walk on the moon. He was a whistleblower to the point he held an impromptu press conference without permission because he did report after report after report, submitted it to the Pentagon. We are a decade away from going, not a couple of years. They did nothing about it. He's infuriated. Without permission, he takes all these reporters to the top of the rocket and takes a lemon the size of a grapefruit and puts it on the rocket door, says this thing is a piece of junk. It infuriated the Pentagon. His wife told me, I interviewed her for 4 hours. Okay, Mike? She asked me not to put this information in my film until she died. That's why it's in the book, among many other new revelations, which we'll get into.
Wow.
She said that on January 26, 1967, her husband came home from work and said this, hon, for some strange reason, the CIA is all over the launch pad today. I wonder why they're there. I've never seen the CIA here a single day in all these years. Why are they here today? The very next day after the lemon incident, he's killed by faulty equipment. Okay. It's her opinion that he was killed by the CIA. So it's one thing, Mike, if they faked the moon landing and never killed anybody. Maybe it's the devious part of me. I kind of respect their ingenuity, right? But not if they kill people and widow wives and orphan children. And what's the first document of our country? It's not the Constitution. It's the Declaration of Independence. And it says when any nation becomes destructive of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. We have it in writing legally. We can get rid of the federal government without a war. We just decree it. And because what's the first one? Life. They're murdering their own people. They murdered their astronaut because he wouldn't cooperate with the moon landing fraud. That's not my opinion. That's the opinion of his widow. She told me so.
Yeah.
Right?
Let's talk about the astronauts, though. So for the astronauts that weren't killed, then your assertion is that then the astronauts that were part of the faked moon landings, then they had to just play the role of the astronaut hero for the remainder of their lives, pretending like they walked on the moon and furthering the lie. And of course, that's easy because you're considered a national hero. You know, everybody, praises your quote achievements. But I think NASA stands for not a single achievement. Actually, by the way, that's what the acronym
Or
really
never
means.
a straight answer.
Yeah, never a straight answer. But what's your take on these astronauts? I know you confronted one astronaut at one point who was very unhappy about your questions.
Well, actually, I confronted 8 of them.
8. Wow.
Because we had $1 million a rocket builder, for NASA backing us because he thought it was his patriotic duty. He just wants to remain anonymous so his stock didn't go down. But in any case, he gave us this money to investigate this. So my follow-up film is called Astronauts Gone Wild, which was really titled after the filming of it. I just thought, I guess from childhood courtroom dramas I saw on TV, why not track these guys down and have them swear on the Bible? Some wouldn't give interviews. The some that did charged $2,000 an hour in cash, which we paid them. And then I showed them this footage we uncovered of them faking being halfway to the moon. And one, of course, infamously punches me. Another one threatens to shoot me. Another one threatens to punch me. And in one instance, an astronaut literally kicks me from behind after I show him the footage and he turns beets red. Get out of my house. Well, in all that commotion, Mike, I leave a high-quality wireless microphone on him. And in all the commotion, my camera operator is so freaked out on being assaulted, he forgets to hit stop record on the camera. So while the beta cam is in the back of the rental car in the guy's driveway, we're recording the audio of his private conversation in his house with his son.
Wow.
And I drive away and it works for like half a mile. You know what I mean? And I'm driving away, recording the conversation the entire time. And I'm like, I forgot my, $700 microphone. Let me go back and get it. I go back and get it. And then the film secretary did transcripts of all these interviews. There's, 8 confrontations with Apollo astronauts in Astronauts Gone Wild. And 3 months later, she calls me up frantic. Bart, do you know what they're talking about, privately before you went back and got your mic? I'm like, I don't know what. She says they're talking about calling the CIA to have you killed. And I'm like, that's pretty funny. She says, no, Bart, they're talking about calling the CIA to have you killed. And I'm like, that's pretty funny. She says, Bart, you're not hearing me. They're talking about calling the CIA to have you killed. And they are. Do you want to call the CIA and have them whacked? First of all, why does an Apollo astronaut civilian mission have the CIA in his Rolodex?
Yeah,
Secondly,
exactly. Why would you kill a journalist who's asking questions?
Exactly. If I'm some silly person who thinks it was done in a TV studio or Air Force base and they really went, why would they care? Why would the CIA be involved? You understand?
Right.
So the fact that the CIA is involved in killing me means I'm right, and
yeah, clearly.
That's just the way that it is.
Okay, another question, Bart, kind of shifting gears, but that's fascinating. Astronauts Gone Wild. Back in the late 60s and early 70s when these Apollo missions were happening, people did not have computers, personal computers. People did not have advanced, AI analysis systems. And people actually had really crappy TVs. You couldn't really see that clearly what was going on. So it was kind of technically easy to fake because the average person is like, my TV's got horrible reception and it was kind of static. It kind of looks like the moon. It's all good. But today, with all the scrutiny and all the computational power that's in the hands of citizens and AI, as you already mentioned, it's pretty easy to look back at the films from the Apollo missions, the official NASA films and recordings, and it looks like a Saturday Night Live skit.
Well, the interesting thing about that, Mike, is they destroyed the originals. Here's what happened. So Ron Howard's grandfather warned him the moon missions were fake, but he grew up in the time of the Apollo, had a Saturn V rocket toy, just like I did. His grandfather said they didn't go. He didn't listen. So in his zeal, he's like executive producer for this IMAX Apollo movie, came out, 20 years ago. And of course, this is like 100 feet by 120 feet. And he wants the originals. He wants to transfer them to HD. He goes to NASA, says, we want the originals. They say, give us a few days. But they get back with him 3 days later, and they said everything is missing. All the originals are gone. Some we just can't find, and others we accidentally recorded over. I guess an I Love Lucy episode, over the greatest episode of all time. They deliberately destroyed the equipment. One of the clips at Sibrel.com of my interactive book, which I read on audio, Kindle or print, is NASA's own engineers saying they intentionally destroyed all the technology that they used to go to the moon, all the blueprints, all the schematics, all the telemetry as to the rocket, where it was, all the original videotapes. Now, if you really went to the moon and spent an equivalent of $200 billion on this technology, the last thing in the world you would do is destroy it. But that's exactly what they did. Yeah. Now, if you perpetrated a fraud, you would destroy everything. So the fact that they destroyed everything is proof of the fraud. Just like Oswald's, being killed before trial is proof of conspiracy right there. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
And so there are no originals. That's the amazing thing. And they destroyed them. In fact, if you can find a print from the 6970 of Apollo 11, the soil is caramel brown, and the soil color in the Chinese probes is caramel brown because that's the soil color of the moon. It just looks gray from the bright light looking at it from Earth. So in the original pictures, the soil is brown, but the background is a grayish blue. Gives away the fake background pretty easily.
Right.
So they've color corrected all of them to now the ground is grayish blue, and the background is grayish blue. But there's so much evidence that they didn't go to the moon, like in the 3-minute video, shadows intersecting. That would prove it in a court of law. The classified footage of them faking being halfway to the moon. The NBC News director says it proves they didn't go to the moon. My greatest critic says it's them faking being, part of the mission. Why would any of it be fake if they really went? Then we have the fact that you can't have 1,000 times greater space traveling technology in the past and in the future. That's never happened in the history of the world. Just 10 years after the first atomic bomb, they were 1,000 times more powerful. Think how far we should be in the universe by now if we really went to the moon with 1960s technology. And then lastly, revealed in my book for the very first time, we have an eyewitness who eyewitnessed them film the fake moon landing at Cannon Air Force Base as he stood beside President Johnson June 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 1968. In fact, as the guy is dying, fearing the judgment of God,
this is the deathbed confession video, right?
That's right. And a deathbed confession is like double the power in court. I mean, if I saw somebody shoot somebody in a 7-Eleven, that's pretty damaging testimony. But if I say something as I'm dying, courts consider that doubly powerful. So the first thing out of the guy's mouth while he's dying is he wanted to confess that he killed somebody. And then his son says, well, who did you kill? And he said, I killed a coworker at Cannon Air Force Base. His son says he was chief of security, and chief of security at the Air Force's intelligence base. All branches of the military have their CIA-type division. And the CIA-type division of the United States Air Force is at Cannon Air Force Base in Clovis, New Mexico. And his son is so alarmed, he figures the family of this person he killed deserves to have closure. So they bring in the military police, and he's there while the military police are interviewing his father about who he killed. And then they ask him, why? Why did you kill a coworker at Cannon Air Force Base? He says, well, it was my job. We eyewitnessed Apollo 11 being filmed at Cannon Air Force Base June 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, 1968, 1 year in advance. And we were told if we tell anybody, they'll kill us and our family. My coworker came to me privately. He said this is morally wrong, and he was going to go to a reporter and tell somebody, and that he killed them to cover up the moon landing fraud.
Wow.
Not something you make up as you're dying, don't you think, Mike?
No, well, exactly. That's very powerful. And again, that video, I believe, is on your website, the Deathbed Confession. Yeah, I'm looking at it. Let me ask you a different question, though. This is all very powerful, but what about nations like Russia, China, Iran? Surely they are fully aware that America faked the Apollo landings. Because,
absolutely.
But why don't they say it publicly? That's my question. Why don't they challenge the history of America's space program?
It's actually a pretty simple answer. First, let me go ahead and be the opposition for 1 second. The two reasons they say the moon missions must be real. The first one is it involved, hundreds of thousands of people. Well, keep in mind, the atomic bomb was the greatest secret during World War II. It involved 129,500 people and only 8 knew what they were building. It's called departmentalization.
Yes.
You really think like the bank teller at Wells Fargo and the CEO of Wells Fargo know equally about the corruption going on in the banking system? You have the flight director, Eugene Krantz, who I talked to. He said that a controller in command center can tell no difference whatsoever between a simulation and a real flight. It's just a bunch of numbers going by on a screen.
Well,
You
right.
see that?
And plus, they built a lot of equipment, and they did launch rockets. I mean,
Oh, absolutely.
They lifted
launched,
off,
they
and
just
people saw
stayed in
that.
Earth orbit.
Right.
Yeah, they
right.
just stayed in Earth orbit for 8
Exactly.
days. And then the second reason why it must be real, right, according to critics, is the Russians and the Chinese would have squealed. Well, that's simply not the case. For example, if I had a picture of a world leader with a prostitute, I could upload it to the internet and bring them down. Or I could blackmail them year after year after year after year. I have a friend, Mike, who works in the command center of the Chinese Space Agency. Okay. He told me that everybody there knows that the moon missions are fake and that China is blackmailing NASA for space technology to not give it away.
Wow.
If you go to Sibrel.com, there's a video of Putin, who was at the AI conference, being showed the results. I look at his face. First of all, he's not surprised at all. And secondly, he looks scared, like there's some deal. If that comes out, his skeletons will come out too. They're blackmailing us. And then the other people like Japan, India, or whoever, you think they dare not cooperate with the United States? Just ask Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein, or Noriega what happens when you don't cooperate with the United States of America. You see?
Yes, but Bart, America's global dominance is rapidly collapsing. BRICS nations are launching their own currency. De-dollarization is taking place. The U.S. military is failing in Ukraine. It's failing in the Red Sea. As the U.S. crumbles, which I would submit is happening, and the dollar crumbles, isn't there a point where the weakness of the U.S. is so great that one of these other countries eventually wants to pounce and expose the falsehoods that underpin the narrative of America?
Yeah, that may happen. We have to keep in mind that probably this whole America versus Russia and China thing is probably just for show, just like a fake wrestling match. They look like they're enemies, but they're really friends, all on the same team. The New World Order means all the nations will be unified into one government. That means they need the cooperation of China and Russia to do that. They're probably already on board. China and the CIA are madly in love with one another. So they may look like an enemy to boost the defense contracts, but they're really not. Now, it could be that they might intentionally release the truth that the moon landings are fake to crash the dollar, or to crash the stock market, or to discredit America. New World Order, while it does mean Illuminati, Bilderberg Group, and World Economic Forum and all that, it simply technically means a new number one, which means the number one economic military power has to come down from number one in order for there to be a new world order, right? It's a new order of who's number one. What better way to do it than expose the moon landing fraud? So they could use that to their advantage. They could even create a disclosure party telling the truth about JFK 9/11 moon landing. I don't know.